I spent 4 years on the manifestation roller coaster before I figured out what was actually going wrong. The techniques worked sometimes. Then they didn't. Then they did again. No pattern I could see. I knew SATs. I understood mental diet. I could visualize perfectly. Some manifestations would appear beautifully. Others never showed up. Some appeared then evaporated within weeks. Here's what I finally discovered. I was building state for 1 hour and dismantling it for 23 hours. The technique wasn't the problem. What I did between practice sessions was destroying everything. Most people who've been practicing Neville's methods for 6 months or more are stuck in this exact same loop. You're not failing because you don't know how to do SATs. You're failing because nobody taught you how to maintain the state you build during SATs across your daily consciousness. Tonight, I'm going to show you the 4 specific places where your assumption breaks down between sessions and why fixing these gaps is what turns inconsistent results into reliable manifestation. The issue isn't that you're doing Neville's methods wrong during practice. It's what happens in your unmanaged hours. Most people treat Neville's work like meditation, something you do for 20 or 30 minutes, then return to normal consciousness. You sit down, you do SATs, you feel it real, you drift off to sleep feeling satisfied. Then you wake up and immediately slip back into your habitual thoughts, your automatic reactions, your old inner conversations. You think the technique didn't work. The technique was never the problem. In his teachings from 1952, Neville said this: an assumption, though false, if persisted in, will harden into fact. Most LOA teachers will tell you this means visualize harder or feel it more intensely. They're wrong. They completely missed the critical phrase, if persisted in. Neville wasn't talking about persisting in the practice. He was talking about persisting in the assumption itself, continuously, not just during your 20-minute session. Here's what he meant. Your assumption is your state of consciousness. It's not what you do for 20 minutes before bed. It's who you are across all 24 hours. When you're driving to work, when you're checking your bank account, when you're talking to your family, when circumstances seem to contradict what you want, that's where your real assumption lives. But here's where almost everyone breaks down. They build the desired state beautifully during practice, then spend their waking hours dismantling it. 4 specific places where this happens, 4 patterns that turn consistent technique into inconsistent results. But I haven't told you yet about the most dangerous moment in this entire process. The specific 3-minute window where most people destroy 8 hours of subconscious work without even realizing it. I'll show you exactly when that window opens and how to recognize it. Because missing this single moment is why some people practice for years and never see consistent results. The first mistake is what I call the practice session trap. You finish your SATs, you felt it real, everything was perfect. Then you immediately return to what you think of as regular life. Regular thoughts, regular concerns, regular self-concept, as if the 20 minutes of practice exists in a bubble, separate from the rest of your day. Take someone who has been practicing SATs for 6 months to manifest a new job. Every night she visualizes perfectly. She sees herself in the new office, feels the satisfaction, hears congratulations from friends. During those 20 minutes, she genuinely feels employed in her desired position. Then she wakes up, checks her email, sees no responses to applications, and immediately shifts back to job search consciousness. Worry about money, frustration with her current situation, anxiety about the future. She spends 20 minutes in the state of having the job and nearly 24 hours in the state of needing the job. Which assumption do you think hardens into fact? Neville taught that imagination must become your new habit of thought, not your occasional practice, your habitual way of thinking. Most people reverse this completely. They make limitation their habit and imagination their exception. Actually, let me give you the context first. Even if you catch yourself doing this and try to maintain some awareness after practice, there's a second place where most people's assumption completely collapses. The morning demolition. This is that dangerous 3-minute window I mentioned. You do perfect SATs practice. You fall asleep in the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Then you wake up, and within 3 minutes before you're even fully conscious, you return to your old self concept. Your first thoughts are worry, complaint, or mental rehearsal of problems. You've just demolished 8 hours of subconscious work in 3 minutes of unconscious thinking. This took me embarrassingly long to figure out. I would have these powerful SAT sessions, really feel it real, wake up feeling great for about 30 seconds. Then my mind would immediately go to my to do list, my problems, my circumstances. I thought I was just being practical. I didn't realize I was training my consciousness to abandon the desired state the moment I returned to waking awareness. The way morning routines are usually taught is backwards. Most teachers focus on what you do after you're fully awake: meditation, affirmations, journaling. Neville didn't teach it that way. He focused on the transition moment itself, the first 3 minutes of consciousness. That's where your real assumption gets tested. Before you're even thinking about techniques or practices, your consciousness automatically goes somewhere. That automatic direction reveals your true state. Your morning consciousness reveals your true assumption, not your practice session. Your automatic thoughts when you first wake up show you what state you actually live in. If your first thoughts are worry, frustration, or mental rehearsal of problems, you're not living in the assumption of the wish fulfilled. You're visiting it for 20 minutes, then returning home to limitation. You might catch yourself in the morning and course correct, but throughout the day, there's a third pattern quietly undoing your work. Now, here's the counterintuitive part. There's a specific type of circumstance that pulls people back into their old state faster than any other, and it's not what you think. It's not the big dramatic challenges. It's something much more subtle that happens dozens of times per day. I'm going to show you what that trigger is and why most people never even notice it happening. Circumstantial reactivity. This is where Neville's teaching gets really practical. He said that circumstances are the frozen assumptions of man. Your current circumstances are reflecting your past assumptions, but most people let those circumstances pull them back into the old state instead of maintaining their assumption regardless of what they see. Here's a pattern I've watched repeat with student after student. They're manifesting money. They do their SATs perfectly. They feel wealthy. They maintain the assumption for days or even weeks. Then they check their bank account and see the same number they saw last month. Or they get an unexpected bill. Or their car breaks down. And they immediately react from their old state. Worry floods in. They start mentally calculating how they'll handle the expense. They slip right back into lack consciousness. But that's not the subtle trigger I mentioned. The real state killer is much smaller. It's the moment you mentally complain about a price at the grocery store. The moment you silently judge someone's expensive purchase. The moment you automatically calculate whether you can afford something before you even want it. These micro reactions happen dozens of times per day, and each one is a tiny vote for lack consciousness. They think the manifestation isn't working, but the manifestation isn't working perfectly. It's reflecting their dominant assumption, which just shifted from abundance back to lack the moment they reacted to circumstances from their former state. Neville told a story about this that I think about often. A woman came to his lectures for months. She understood the teaching intellectually. She could do the techniques, but her results were inconsistent. One day she asked him, Neville, I do everything you teach, why doesn't it work for me? He told her, you do everything I teach for 1 hour, then you undo it for the remaining hours. You build a state during practice, then tear it down every time circumstances challenge your assumption. She was letting frozen assumptions dictate her present state instead of using her present state to create new assumptions. She was living from circumstances instead of living from imagination. I'll be honest about something. If you want to go deeper on this, I've put together a complete state architecture diagnostic in the description below. It's free, link in the description. The fourth pattern is the most subtle, but it might be the most destructive. Unconscious inner conversations. Your habitual inner dialogue throughout the day, the mental commentary that runs in the background of your mind. Most people have no idea how contradictory their inner conversations are to their formal practice. If you've been doing SATs for months without consistent results, the problem isn't your visualization technique. The problem is your inner conversations. Let me show you what I mean here. You spend 20 minutes in SATs feeling financially secure. Then you spend the day having inner conversations about money problems, mentally complaining about prices, silently worrying about bills, having imaginary arguments with your boss about needing a raise, having imaginary conversations with friends about how expensive everything is. Your inner conversations are your real prayer. They're happening all day long. They reveal your actual assumption about yourself and your life. And for most people, those conversations directly contradict everything they built during their practice session. I discovered this when I started actually paying attention to my internal dialogue. I was shocked. I thought I was maintaining my desired state pretty well between practice sessions. Then I started noticing my automatic mental commentary. I was having inner conversations from my old state constantly, mentally rehearsing problems, silently complaining about circumstances, having imaginary conversations where I explained my limitations to people. I was doing 20 minutes of positive inner dialogue during SATs, then 16 waking hours of negative inner dialogue throughout the day. The math was not in my favor. But here's what I haven't told you yet. There's a simple test that reveals whether you're actually living in your desired state or just visiting it during practice. This test takes 30 seconds and you can do it right now. It will show you immediately where your real assumption lives because most people think they're doing better than they actually are. This is where most teachers completely miss the point. They focus on the technique itself. Perfect your visualization, feel it more real, do it longer. But technique was never the issue for most people who've been practicing for 6 months or more. You already know how to visualize. You already understand the secret. The gap isn't in your technique, the gap is in your state maintenance. Now you can see the pattern. Each of these isn't just a mistake, they're symptoms of a deeper structural problem. You're treating assumption like an event instead of a state. You're practicing the feeling of the wish fulfilled instead of living from the feeling of the wish fulfilled. Here's that 30-second test. Right now, without preparing or thinking about it, complete this sentence out loud. Money is whatever comes out first is your real assumption about money. Not what you think during SATs, not what you intellectually believe, what you automatically assume. If the first word that came out was tight or hard or scarce, you're living from lack consciousness no matter how perfect your SATs practice is. You can do this test with any area of your life. Relationships are, my career is, my health is. Your automatic completion reveals your actual assumption. Your living state, not your practicing state. Neville taught continuous assumption, not occasional practice. He said imagination must become your new habit of thought. He meant all day, every day, not just during your formal sessions. The assumption you maintain across 24 hours is what hardens into fact, not the assumption you visit for 20 minutes. Remember when I mentioned the practice session trap a moment ago? This is where that becomes practical. There's practice consciousness and there's living consciousness. Practice consciousness is what you do during SATs. Living consciousness is what you do the rest of the day. For most people, these are completely different states. They practice from the wish fulfilled and live from the wish unfulfilled. They build the desired state for 1 hour and dismantle it during their unmanaged hours. You and I are no different. Whatever I figured out, you can figure out faster because I'm telling you the gap directly. I spent 4 years on this roller coaster because I kept trying to perfect my technique instead of examining my state maintenance. I thought longer SATs would solve it, or more detailed visualization, or better feeling work. I was optimizing the 1 hour instead of managing the daily consciousness. The breakthrough came when I realized that my formal practice was never the problem. My informal consciousness was. What happened to my assumption between sessions, how I reacted to circumstances, what my inner conversations were actually about. whether I maintained the desired state when nothing external was supporting it. That's when everything changed, not because I learned better techniques, because I learned state architecture, how to build an assumption during practice and maintain it across daily life, how to catch myself when I started slipping back into the old state, how to course correct without abandoning the assumption entirely. Here's exactly what to do tonight. First, you're going to do your normal SATs practice, but you're going to pay attention to what happens immediately after. Notice if you immediately shift back to planning, worrying, or problem solving. Second, tomorrow morning, you're going to observe your first thoughts upon waking. Before you check your phone, before you start your day, notice what your consciousness automatically goes to. Third, throughout tomorrow, you're going to catch your inner conversations. Not judge them, just notice them. See how often they contradict the state you built during practice. This is diagnostic work. You're not trying to fix anything yet. You're just identifying where your assumption actually breaks down between sessions. Most people have no idea where the gaps are. They think they're maintaining the state reasonably well. Then they start paying attention and realize they're living in the old state 22 hours a day. The techniques work perfectly. SATs works, mental diet works, revision works, but they work for people who maintain the state continuously, not just during practice. They work for people who live from imagination, not just visit it. Here's the realization that changes everything. The reason your SAT sessions haven't been giving you consistent results isn't that you're doing the technique wrong. It's that you're building the desired state for 1 hour and living from the old state during your unmanaged hours. Your assumption isn't what you practice during SATs. Your assumption is what you maintain between SAT sessions. Your daily consciousness determines whether your 1 hour of practice compounds into manifestation or evaporates into wishful thinking. When I had this same realization myself in year 4 of practicing Neville's work, here's what I found. I'd been on what I call the manifestation roller coaster for 4 years. The techniques worked sometimes, then they didn't, then they did again. No pattern I could see. I kept trying to perfect my SATs practice, thinking longer sessions or more detailed visualization would solve the inconsistency. Then I noticed what was happening between practice sessions, not during. My self talk reverted within hours. My reactions to circumstances reverted within minutes. Remember that morning demolition pattern we covered? That destroyed entire nights of SATs work. I started tracking my consciousness across full days, time stamping my actual thoughts and reactions. 2 years of pattern mapping. That became the protocol I now call state architecture. That's exactly why I built the source code diagnostic. It walks you through where your specific gap lives across the hours between practice sessions, morning consciousness shifts, circumstantial reactivity, inner conversation patterns, state maintenance protocols. It's the complete framework I wish someone had given me in year 1 instead of more techniques. It's free, link in the description below. That's the next step after the realization we just covered. Try this tonight. Do your normal SATs practice, then pay attention to what happens in the first hour after. Notice if you immediately shift back to planning, worrying, or problem solving. That's where your real work begins. Neville said in his teachings from 1952, an assumption, though false, if persisted in will harden into fact. He meant persisted across all 24 hours, not just during your practice sessions. The techniques work perfectly when you maintain the state continuously. Most people just never learned how to bridge the hours between sessions. Now you know where to look. If this helped you see the gap you've been missing, subscribe so we can keep building this framework together. Until next time.